Welcome to Transformative Principal. I'm your host, Jethro Jones, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. This episode is brought to you by John Catt Educational, a professional development publisher serving as the global leader in combining both research and practice in all materials. Find timely PD publications to support yourself and your faculty by visiting them online at us.johncattbookshop.com. Great instruction gets students engaged. TeachFX equips teachers with the instructional strategies and job-embedded feedback they need to get students engaged in virtual or in-person classes. Learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer at teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal. Welcome to Transformative Principal. This is episode 374, and I'm excited to have Matthew Moyer on the program today. Matthew, welcome to Transformative Principal.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. I forgot to read your bio, which I had prepared but didn't read it, so let me read it now. Sometimes we do things backwards. Matthew Moyer is an elementary school principal with over 17 years experience in administration and 23 years experience in education itself. In addition to his job as principal, he is a nationally distinguished principal for Pennsylvania Principal of the Year, author, national speaker, adjunct professor, and staff developer with Tom Stetcher and Associates. And so now I'll say welcome. Thank you for being here.
I'll say thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. And thanks for the kind introduction as well.
Yeah. So I do want to talk first and foremost about the book that you wrote, which is The Adventures of David and Donald, the Fractured Flower Pot. And I want to talk about that because that is based loosely on your family's experience when your dad and uncle were younger. And so would you just talk a little bit about what that book is and what people can hope to get out of that?
Sure. So it's called The Adventures of David and Donald, the Fractured Flower Pot. It's the first in what I hope will be a series of adventures for David and Donald. And as you mentioned, the characters David and Donald are named after my dad and my uncle. But the story itself actually comes from something that happened with my own brothers and I. We went to go visit our grandpa, and we're in his backyard playing, preparing for field day, just like in the book. And one of my brothers broke one of his terracotta flower pots. From there, it kind of diverges from the actual reality. But the story is really about then how do they solve this problem, which I think is a common thing that any kid, any person can relate to. And it talks about the steps that you go through in thinking about solutions to your problem and the consequences that go along with it. And this is what we talk to kids about, but adults about too. You got to think through all the possible consequences. What can happen if we do this? What can happen if we do that? And then pick the solution that works best for you. And that's what the story goes on to do. And, it's a tool that I think educators could really use and enjoy. And it's got, questions in the back that they can use as, some thought-provoking things with kids to get them thinking about, well, what would you do if this was a situation with you? Or what have you done when you've run into these situations? And how do you think about the consequences for any choice that you make? And there's always going to be a consequence. It might be a good one. It might be a bad one. I think things work out okay for David and Donald in the book, but that's really the goal there, is to make it a teaching tool. It's a fun story. It's kind of a long read. I'll admit, it might take a couple of sessions before bedtime to get through it, but it's a fun book. And I just had a lot of fun writing it. And it was really a joy. My illustrator is a teacher that works in my building who did a phenomenal job. Her name is Katie Coulong. So I have to always give her a shout out because she got the characters just right. And that was really important in the first and what I hope will be a series, because if the look isn't right, I'm going to have to stick with it a long time. But the look was just right. She did a phenomenal job with that. So there you go.
That's very cool. And it's fun to see people create things and put them out there for others to see, and especially something that's going to help you have those conversations about, what to do when you make a mistake and how to overcome that. I think that's really important. So thank you for having that. You can get the link to that at the show notes for this podcast at jethrojones.com/podcast/episode 374. You recently became the Pennsylvania Principal of the Year for your Elementary Principals Association, which is awesome. And one of the things that you have talked about is as being very important is this idea of building relationships. And currently we're in the middle of a pandemic. And when this comes out, who knows where we're going to be and who's going to be doing what. But can you share with us how you've been able to build relationships even during the pandemic and what you've been striving to do when school has been uncertain and closed and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. I mean, relationships, I believe, are at the cornerstone of what principals need to do. You need to build relationships. And for so many of our kids, they're not interested in learning from you until you build a rapport and relationship with them. And that matters for teachers, but it matters for principals too. And to me, it's one of the most important things that I do. And I do it during the regular school year when things are normal by engaging with students all the time. I'm in every classroom every day. And I'll be honest, I sometimes get frustrated when I hear about principals who don't do similar things and don't connect. And I try to make it a point to get to know every single one of my children the best I can at my building by name. And I have about 400 of them, so that's not an easy task to do. And in these times, it's much more difficult, obviously, being virtual. So, I've had to employ some new strategies to connect with kids and connect with my staff and connect with families. So we do a lot. I do a lot with social media. We have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, we have a Twitter feed, all for my school. And one of the things that I do through there, I do a lot of different things through there, is I make it a point, though, to do something every single day. There's a post on there 365 days a year, weekends, holidays. And I do that all the time, but I'm connecting through that means in a variety of ways. And one of the ways that I just came up with and started to do this year is called Pop-Up Principal. So I know my neighborhoods, I know where my kids are, and I get out into the neighborhood for Pop-Up Principal and done a couple of sessions already. So for example, the first one, went out into one of the neighborhoods, pulled up, saw some of my kids with their parents. I had my mask on, called them over. Hey guys, you want to go Facebook Live for Pop-Up Principal with Mr. Moyer? Yeah. And so I had a couple of dice with me. One that you roll, it has exercises. One has a number. And so the kids rolled the 2 die, did the exercise, did the number. And if they did that, they got a t-shirt. And we did this all Facebook Live. And so other kids from the neighborhood showed up and we did that. So it was a great way to get them active and engaged too. We're sitting in front of the screen too much right now. So it's a great way to get them up and moving and for me to stay connected with them. So I've done a couple of other sessions like that for Pop-Up Principal. And that's one new thing I've done. But old school things work too. When I say old school, the old-fashioned postcard is a great way to connect with people. How often do we get anything good in the mail? I don't know about you, but I get bills. That's what I get in the mail. I get bills and I get junk mail. A postcard means a lot. And so I write those out to my staff members and I write those out to students based on information I might get from the teacher or someone to let them know, hey, they're doing a good job. And I do that in new fashion ways as well, too. The cell phone and so on. I text parents to tell them that their children are doing a good job. I call parents to tell them their children are doing a good job. And some folks might say that's crazy. You're texting from your cell phone? Yes, I am. And I have not had one time and I've done this before the pandemic. I've never had anyone take advantage of that. But a little reach out from someone to say, hey, your teacher told me that your son is doing a great job at participating in the virtual world. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a great way to get connected with people, letting them know you appreciate them, and doing the same thing with staff to let them know, and parents too. Like, listen, this isn't easy for parents. Hey, mom, hey, dad, thank you for supporting your children and making sure they're doing these things. So those are some of the ways that I continue to try to build relationships and build rapport with them. I probably could go on with some other ones, but those are the ones that come to my mind immediately.
Well, I think those were great examples. And I want to just add to them a little bit that, and reemphasize this idea, you can go out in the community, you can trust people, you can support them. And too often, that comment about people being surprised that you give out your cell phone. They trust us with their kids for 7 hours a day. The least we could do is trust them to be responsible with our cell phone. It's so easy now to put a stop to people harassing you, like if they're sending you inappropriate texts or calling at inappropriate times, do not disturb, block numbers. I mean, it's super easy now. So that shouldn't be a deterrent. The other thing is that pop-up principal. I love that idea. And I think that's really powerful. In a previous school, I would go to the home of every single kid with my staff. So we'd split it up. So I didn't go to every single kid's house, but we'd go to their homes and we would say hello. And a lot of people, suggested, maybe you're doing that so you can get an idea of what these kids' life is like at home and all that. And that really wasn't it for me. I wanted those kids to know that we cared about them deeply and that they mattered to us as a human being first and foremost. So we didn't care what their house looked like or where they were from or any of that kind of stuff. What we cared about is them knowing that we cared enough to leave our place and go out to them. And I think with the pop-up principal, you really show that. And that's a powerful way to support kids and make sure they know that you care about them first and foremost. And when you can do that, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, powerful things happen when you make those connections. And just to piggyback on what you said, something else we have done for years is our impact program, where we do visit students' houses. So myself and the team will go out once a marking period to recognize those achievements. And it's just a wonderful thing. And as you kind of hinted at, what I would say is that people should remember to assume goodwill from other people. Just assume goodwill, because most of the time people are really good people and they love their children and they want only what's best for them. And sometimes we disagree on what's best for them, but that's all that they want. So assume some goodwill in what you're doing, and I think you usually can't go wrong.
John Catt Educational supports high-quality teaching and learning by providing publications that are research-based, practical, and focused on the key topics proven essential in today's and tomorrow's schools. The latest John Catt publications include a book whose bold, transformative ideas amaze and infuriate people around the world, according to one reviewer, a title from global leaders in curriculum planning, practice, and retrieval, one book that says stop talking and start doing with regard to teacher well-being, and much more. These books, used by educators of all roles across North America and worldwide, amplify fresh, engaging voices with practical strategies to create transformative change. Learn more in our show notes at jethrojones.com/podcast. During COVID, every teacher is a new teacher. That's why innovative school leaders are turning to TeachFX, whose professional learning platform doubles student engagement online or in person. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformative principal. It's about more than just assuming goodwill. It's about doing things that prove that you are assuming that goodwill. And that's a piece that I highlighted. And I'm sure that played into why you received the Principal of the Year award. I want to change gears a little bit, though, and talk about something about how you make decisions during this time, because it's not an easy thing to, we're bombarded with all these different ideas and opportunities and challenges and different direction on what should happen and what shouldn't happen and all that kind of stuff. And so in order to not just assume goodwill, but then make good decisions for the people that we are serving, how do you find a way to, to make those decisions that are in the best interest of your kids and the families that you're serving? What's your decision-making process and how do you go about that?
Sure, that's a great question. One of the things I learned early on, and I've been a principal at my building now this is my 16th year. In my first year, the guy that was my boss, his name's Dr. Jeff Sparagana, he retired a couple of years ago. He was my mentor. And, when things came up, I would call him and ask him, what should I do? What do you think? And inevitably, what he would do is ask me 20 different questions that I didn't know the answer to, and I'd have to go get those answers and then come back. And I learned pretty early on, find out the answers to those questions before we can make a good decision. So the same process, I think, comes into play now. Although we're in uncharted waters, we haven't had to do any of this before. And that's why it's even more important to ask all the questions and gather all the information. And another kind of important fundamental thing to me is top-down and bottom-up leadership. And that means including everyone in the conversation so you can make the best decision. And I know that frustrates people sometimes because some folks come to you and they want, give me a decision right now. I need an answer. And it can't always be that way. And right now, it's most often not that way. And so, we've had to pump the brakes. All right, let me gather some information. Let me talk to some people. Let me find out a lot of information from lots of people and involve people in the process. Because if you don't, you end up making a bad decision, and then it takes you 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 times as long to undo the mistake you just made. And I think the mistakes that I see some folks making are because they didn't take their time to make a good decision and gather as much information as possible from the right people. I mean, you got to talk to people, you got to talk to teachers, but you got to talk to parents too. We've done I believe, a good job of engaging parents in our district in the process through surveys and things so that we can make the best decision possible in collaboration with them. And it's a philosophical thing. You have to believe that the collaboration is worth it. If you don't believe it, then you don't take the time.
That is absolutely correct. And that's exactly what we need more of, is believing that the collaboration is worth it. So this summer, when nobody knew what was going to happen with schools, I knew one thing that I was 100% sure of, that no matter what states or districts decided about how school was going to reopen, when kids came back to school, there'd be one person who was left holding the bag and whatever happened, and that was the principal. And by extension, every teacher with her small group of kids. However, the principal would be the one who'd be holding it for the whole school. And so we created, this workshop to help principals figure out how to reopen their schools no matter what their district plan was. And it was so amazing to see the principals working in there, and then to have them go, and one of the first thing that we did as part of that was to have them call parents who weren't parents that they often talk to and get their feedback about what the spring experience was like. And one call that I'll never forget was this principal came back to the group, and she said, one of the parents was so glad that I called because he's illiterate and he couldn't read anything that we sent out. And I never thought that one of my parents would be illiterate. I've thought, yeah, maybe they don't speak English and they speak some other language, and so I could translate for them. But I never thought that one of my parents could be illiterate. And now I have this totally different perspective and this awareness that there's something else that I need to prepare for and think about. And just recognizing that piece there. And this dad wanted more than anything to be involved, but he couldn't because he didn't read. And so he couldn't engage in anything that came home, because everything, as soon as the pandemic hit, became written communication only. And she realized that was an error on her side, and started working to make that better, which was just incredibly inspiring in my mind.
Yeah, that's a great story. It illustrates a really important point when you're a principal, or lots of different jobs, is that you have to articulate your message in multiple ways, in multiple means, to reach all of your audience. So I've been a big believer in the use of video to get the message out, short videos, because what, most people aren't watching anything more than about 3 minutes. And I have used that as a tool for years, but much more so since the pandemic hit, with getting information out. So yeah, and I'm sure we have some families and people that we don't know. We don't know that they can't understand what we're saying, or we do our best to translate some things out, but we have some people that might not even be literate in their home language, but they can hear your message and they get the point with that. So you have to hit them in multiple ways, in multiple means. And that's really critical to getting information to people and receiving that information. So that's a powerful point you just made, for sure.
Going back to the idea of making decisions, one of the things that we've experienced during this pandemic is that a decision may be made at some point, but the implementation has to happen almost immediately. And that's been a real challenge for everybody. And, that's not limited to just education, but so many things have changed, and those changes have happened just super fast. What is your advice for dealing with that kind of a situation where the decision can be made, but the implementation needs to, like when schools cancel, it need to happen that week for most places? How do you support people when they're caught blindsided by that kind of stuff?
Yeah, those have been incredible challenges. And I think that, one of the things that we've learned is, first of all, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I'm going to tell you that I borrowed that from our superintendent, who reminds us, and I've reminded a lot of people, we're going to do something here. It's not going to be perfect, and we have to be okay with that. We have to accept that it's going to be the best it can be, and we're going to try to make it as good as we can make it. We're going to try to make it perfect, but it's not going to be perfect, and we can't hold up certain things because things were changing and evolving quickly. And so that's part of the advice I would give to people is, you do your homework the best you can, but at some point you have to move forward. Otherwise, with how quickly things move, you're going to get left behind. And so that's part of the advice is you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that doesn't mean you rush to a decision just because, we have to. You take your time you need to, but at some point you have to move forward and make a decision that's going to be the best decision you can, and keep the kids paramount in that decision. The kids always come first. They're the most important. And after that comes teachers and parents, but the kids are most important. And if that's part of your philosophy, we put kids first and their needs first, then the rest becomes a little bit easier as well. So you have to build your principles, and that's PLE. Build your principal, PAL, decisions on your principles, PLE, and that's really important. And if your principles tell you that kids come first, then that's the base that you make your decisions on, and you keep that in mind. We had to make a lot of decisions quickly, and then they changed a week later or 2 weeks later. I've never, ever seen anything like this where things change so quickly. In the springtime, they were changing so fast we could barely keep up. They've slowed down a little bit, but they continue to evolve on a regular basis. And the other advice I would give is that, don't double down on a bad idea. Sometimes we get dug in and we fall in love with an idea. Don't double down on a bad idea. When you find out it's a bad idea, it's time to adjust and time to move on. Don't dig in on those things, because that's just going to cause you problems. And I've seen that as well. People just, it looks like we're doubling down on a bad idea. It was not a great idea to start with. Let's not double down on it. Let's change it. Let's pivot. Let's move. Let's be flexible and let's listen to folks.
Well, one of those ideas is the idea of teaching your students half that are in class and half that are online on a Zoom at the same time, doing the same exact thing. And that's rooted in some other bad ideas, like that the teacher is the only person who can help kids learn something, and that's the only way to deliver information. And I've seen that kind of doubling down that just is never going to be a good experience for anybody. And there are ways to do it, because in a previous district, that was my role, was setting up and making sure that the program we had, where a teacher was in one building and she was teaching simultaneously the kids in front of her in 3 other buildings. It's possible to make work, but not in an emergency situation, not in a way where you're just thrown into that with no other planning or preparation. It's just not a good way to do it. So in closing, Matthew, what is one thing that a principal can do this week to be a transformative principal like you?
Wow, one thing they can do this week. I guess the one thing I would tell any principal to do, whether you're in a virtual setting or brick and mortar, is to get out of your office and get with where the kids are and see what they're doing, see what the teachers are doing. And, whether that's a virtual setting or a brick and mortar, getting into classrooms every day matters. I tell my teachers one of the things we have to do in our district is at the end of the year, we have a summative meeting with them. Every single teacher, it's an hour or so long meeting that I have with every teacher. And I tell them all the time, if we get together at that meeting and you tell me something that I didn't know, I didn't do a very good job. Because I should know what's happening, because I should see it. And so a transformative leader, a great leaders, I think they get out in the classrooms, they get out of their office, or in this day and age, they at least click on to the Zoom meeting or the Google Meet, and they see what's happening in classrooms, and they get out there and see what's happening.
Very good. Thank you so much. If you'd like to connect with Matthew, you can go to Twitter. He is at Moyer Matthew D. And show notes and links to his book are at jethrojones.com/podcast/episode 374. Thank you again, Matthew, for being part of Transformative Principal.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you to our valued partner, John Catt Educational. If you are a leader looking to make transformative change by providing yourself and your leaders and teachers with professional development that is research-based and rigorous, yet easy to digest and full of practical strategies, check out the latest publications from John Catt. Visit us.johncattbookshop.com to find information on bulk orders or learn much more in our show notes. You can also use the code TRANSFORMATIVE to save a bundle at us.johncattbookshop.com. School principals across the country are using TeachFX's virtual PD and job-embedded feedback to boost student engagement during COVID. With TeachFX, teachers get 8 times more feedback and generate 144% more student engagement on average in a school year with no additional work for school leaders or teachers. To learn more about TeachFX and get a special offer, visit teachfx.com/transformativeprincipal.